Hello, and welcome to the Unconventional Path, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Stories and Ideas. I'm Bela Musits.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
Hey, Mike, I want to recognize a significant accomplishment in the podcasting world, or at least our podcasting world. As some of our longtime listeners may know, in addition to this podcast about entrepreneurship, we do another podcast about sailing called Sailing and Cruising the East. And while we started this podcast back in September of 2018, when we were both at the business school faculty at Clarkson University. And this is episode 177 of the Unconventional Path. We started our sailing podcast in September of 2020 and have released 123 episodes. Well, 123 plus 177 equals 300. Mike, I know it's sort of unbelievable, but we've done 300 podcasts together. That's a lot of talking and a lot of interviews. And hopefully our listeners have received some value from all of these podcasts.
Wow, Bela, I didn't realize this, but you've always been better in math than I have. But I like that you figured this out. And honestly, and again, don't take this the wrong way, but there's no way that I would have thought when you talked me into starting a podcast and that 300 episodes later, we'd still be doing this and having fun and enjoying it. And I thank you because I know that I've learned a ton and we've met a lot of amazingly interesting, smart, and impressive people through all this. And I agree with you. I hope that our listeners have learned something and hopefully been a bit entertained along the way over the past several years. So thanks to you, Bela. And of course, thanks to all of our guests over the years who've shared their knowledge. And most importantly, thanks to all our listeners all around the world.
Yeah, a big thanks to all of our listeners. And it is all around the world. It is amazing, the listeners we have in so many different countries. We appreciate you tuning in and listening to our podcast. And we hope you certainly enjoy it. Well, how about let's dive into today's podcast. So today's guest on the podcast is Kathryn Cook. She is the co-founder of NuCicer, and it's all about chickpeas, Mike. I learned so much about chickpeas in my conversation with her. And the one thing that I concluded was I should be eating more of them. And I think if it's up to her, she's trying to figure out a way in which we're all going to be eating more chickpeas. So, there's a lot that goes into a business like this, from developing new seeds to getting farmers to plant them, to turning the seeds into something that can be consumed. In this case, they turn them into flour, and then getting the food producers to incorporate the chickpea flour into products that they manufacture, and then getting them on the shelves and getting people like you and I to buy them and consume them. So it's a really sort of interesting business, I think.
Yeah, I agree, Bela. This is fascinating. And I think for listeners to key in on this is break this into content and process. Content, what she does, all about the chickpea, right? I think you're going to learn some amazing things about something maybe you take for granted, right? The little chickpea, maybe you have it in hummus, whatever. But I think you'll learn some stuff about what chickpeas are and can be. And then also the process, how she went through the process of building the business with her co-founders and getting funding and scaling it. And that's where she's at right now. So I think this is going to be really cool. Always great to have somebody with interesting vision. And I think let's get right to the interview with Kathryn Cook, Bela.
Hello, Kathryn. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Bela. Thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah, sure. This is great. So you co-founded a company. So tell us a little bit, sort of you're an entrepreneur. Give me your elevator pitch about the company.
Yeah, absolutely. So, NuCicer, we are an ag and food tech company working to unlock the full potential of chickpea in our food system and really bring it back as a staple crop to create more value for growers as a rotation opportunity to improve soil health and also to create value for end consumers nutritionally, but focusing on better flavor, better function, and more minimally processed foods globally.
Super. That sounds like a great mission. Certainly the world can use more sustainable crops, more food sources. There's a lot of hungry people in the world. And we can certainly improve the quality of our foods in many of the developed countries. So tell me a little bit about the mysterious chickpea. What is it? How's it used today? Why the chickpea versus something else?
So chickpea, usually when I tell people I'm working on chickpea, the first response I get is, I love chickpea. I eat hummus, or I love chickpea. I, have them in my salads. Both great applications. But if we, look at globally our food system, more than 51% of our human caloric intake comes from three crops. Corn, wheat, and rice. And that, the limitations with those crops as we continue to scale, different aspects of our food system, the growing population, some of the climate challenges and environmental shifts that we're seeing, that limited view and kind of scope with those three crops is putting our food system at risk. And so we see chickpea as having a massive opportunity to unlock environmental sustainability in our food system. Unfortunately, if you look at commodity chickpea, the chickpea that's available today, while it works as a whole bean or in, let's say a hummus application, you start looking at it as a flour or a protein, more as an ingredient into formulations. And you start realizing it's broken today. And it's broken for a few reasons. The oil content is high in comparison to some of these other flours, creating shelf life and off flavor challenges. Its protein content is too low, and the yields have not been properly optimized agronomically for growers to create an economical solution for purified protein ingredients. And you start looking at why and how, right? There are all these papers that show chickpea saved the world, right? But if you look back in evolution, when chickpea as a crop was originally domesticated, 7,000-8,000 years ago, there were a very small number of seeds that were actually taken forth and domesticated. And 95% of the diversity in the species in NuCicer, the genus, was actually left behind in those wild ancestors. And that means that over the last several thousand years, as we've gone through domestication and modern day breeding, we have really bottlenecked our ability to improve chickpea and therefore fix some of the ingredient qualities and traits that are necessary if we want it to have an impact. So, this is a long way of saying what's special about NuCicer is that our technology, we spun out of the University of California, Davis, and that dates back, about 15 years, where our co-founder went and identified the center of origin of modern day chickpea and brought back some of those wild relatives. He started cross-pollinating those, so all physical breeding techniques to expand the available diversity for the purpose of proving that you could essentially redomesticate a crop. And that created a breeding pool, a pre-breeding library of seeds, of material that now NuCicer is taking forth for very targeted traits that will create value in the ingredients market and solve some of the challenges that we have so it can take it to its full potential.
Got it. So what specific product does your company sell?
So we've focused initially on protein, on high protein content. And so our first variety that we really launched full commercial scale this year is a chickpea that has between 50 to 75% more protein than a normal chickpea. Right now we're selling that as a high protein flour into the market, into other ingredient companies, and directly into food and beverage brands. And we are in the process of working on several purified proteins that are derived from this flour through partnerships and contract manufacturing.
Got it. So it sounds like how do you get the farmers to grow the higher protein or this refined chickpea strain so that then you can use it in your products that you sell?
Well, the key here is, we have to understand the grower needs. In order to drive adoption, I think we have to understand the stakeholders, and the growers are an absolutely critical stakeholder in our value chain. And I think often they can get the short end of the stick. Food prices go up. We try to push down, what the price of our commodities, and you can do that when you increase yield, when you improve disease tolerance, because at the end of the day, the grower needs to have. They're running a business. They need to have some level of profitability to incentivize them to continue going forward. So outside of just protein and nutrition and flavor that we're breeding for today, we also very much breed for yield, plant growth architecture, making sure that it fits into the exact planting equipment, harvest equipment that the grower already has. And we look at unit economics of growing our chickpea versus other chickpeas versus other crops, and work with the growers to make sure that that's economical. So I think that's a really critical piece there of how do you share value back? And once the grower sees value, that's where it removes adoption hurdles.
Yeah. So that's really interesting, right? This is a very complicated, I'll use the word supply chain. I don't know if it's exactly accurate, but for your business to work, you have to have a good constant supply of chickpeas, specific varieties, I'll call it. And that means you have to convince growers to grow them. And then you have to meet their requirements, as you just articulated, which is a complicated equation. And then on the other side, you have the demand side of the equation of the supply chain, where you're selling a raw ingredient that you have to convince other people to put into whatever product they're selling or formulating and then selling.
Yeah, exactly. And I it's fascinating. Personally, NuCicer is my first jump into the food and ag industry. Before this, I worked in aerospace, I worked in tech, and I will say I feel very humbled. I've learned a lot about how our food gets to, our plate. And I am very surprised and by the number of challenges and hurdles there are when you think about breeding and the value it can create in the market. I've talked to so many, the work that we're doing, looking at breeding, not just for the grower, but connecting downstream into, I'll call them quality traits, right? Again, whether that's nutrition, function, flavor, something that creates value for the food brand and the end consumer. That's not a new concept. Okay, I can't claim that we've innovated in that concept, but a lot of companies have run into challenges commercializing quality traits. They've done them. There's actually, I'm surprised by how much innovation has been made in soy, in wheat, in sunflower, in corn, and a lot of the staple crops that never sees the light of day. So it's not that we cannot breed for them. It's that we have to figure out how to create value and incentive for adoption. Like you said, it's about the upstream, it's about the grower, it's about these middle processing companies that, depending on what the crop is, can be very fragmented in the system, right? Seed origination companies, cleaning, milling, protein extraction, and then it's about the food brands and that, ultimately you and I as customers, what we're eating. So I actually think that this is an advantage of ours, starting in chickpea. It's a smaller crop, particularly here in North America. It's, in a way, maybe it flies under the radar a little bit of some of the really big commodity boards, really big companies. And it's a little bit easier to, from a scale standpoint, to start working with players and get to meaningful enough volumes that it starts to make economical sense. And I think as that grows, our goal is to use this as an example of a proof point in how we're leaving so much value on the table because we're not breeding for quality traits in our food system, but we should be, and we can show how to do that, starting with chickpea.
Yeah. And it seems to me, I'm trying to understand how you mitigate the risk sort of downstream and upstream. So for the farmer, he's going to say, okay, so instead of planting crop A, I'm now going to plant this crop of chickpeas. And so they're taking a risk. If it doesn't work out, or the farmer cannot sell them at a reasonable price, so what have you guys done to sort of mitigate the risk at that end of the equation?
Yeah, well, I mean, the nice thing is that we are, there are certainly some, I'll say, newer crops in the market, but I would not call chickpea one of them. Chickpea has, globally, it's grown on over 35 million acres. There is a global export and import market for chickpea, so there's inherent value in what's being grown. And just like, other commodity crops, there are macroeconomics that come into play for pricing. So that, I would say, that risk is fairly similar to other crops. Now, what we can do with our product and the differentiation on the protein side, we're connecting those, in a way, we're connecting the suppliers and the growers in this case, and the downstream customers on the demand side, whether that be ingredient companies or food and beverage brands formulating with it. We're essentially connecting those groups. So we create a guaranteed offtake agreement for the grower to help mitigate some of that risk and commodity fluctuation, especially early on as the new variety is scaling up.
Yeah. So I'm not quite sure how to articulate this question because it's still rattling around in my brain.
Yeah.
But there's several different opportunities here. You guys could be focused on the growing side, or you guys could be focused on the harvest, extraction, processing side, or you guys could actually come out with an end product that the consumer buys directly and consumes. So how do you decide where the right place is, right? So,
yeah,
because you can only pull so many levers, and there's a lot of levers in this equation. And
there are.
One could make the argument, and I'm not saying I'm making the argument, one could make the argument that what you really should focus on is the end product. And because you need to get the consumer, the end consumer, pulling this product into the marketplace. And then once that happens, then it makes the other challenges maybe less challenging. So what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, this is a complex, we could talk for a whole hour on this here. So keeping it short, a few thoughts here. Yes, there are a number of opportunities we can play. And I think a common question that I get asked from, friends, family, consumers, and even at trade shows with other companies, the person being a consumer as well, a question we commonly get is, well, can I just buy your flour in like 3-pound bags or a pound, 1 pound bag on the shelf, and like I'd like more protein in my pancakes. I'd like, more protein in my cookies, and I can blend it with wheat, or I can do gluten-free. So that's, I think, from a human standpoint, we would love to do that. However, when you think about business strategy, I think there's a component of this that has to do with scale. We are looking to make a massive impact in the world. I think this is an opportunity where profit and impact actually go hand in hand. We can only be truly successful when we get to large volumes, which means more than just you and I going to the grocery store and buying a pound of chickpea flour, right? This means formulating with it as a staple crop across market segments, snack foods, pastas, pizzas, baked goods, alternative protein products. And when we start thinking about the complexities and the skill sets that are required, this is where I think we have some lessons learned, actually, just in the last 5-10 years, as ag and food tech, let's say, really picked up with new companies entering the market. And as a result of some of those lessons learned, what we're focusing on here at NuCicer is to play a role that we bring differentiation and value. And instead of trying to do it ourselves, truly vertically integrate and go after every aspect of the supply chain by ourselves, we want to partner. We want to work with other companies that are experts in their piece of the value chain, whether they're experts in how do you clean and remove the seed coat of pulses most efficiently, right? It is more complicated than going and buying a piece of equipment, setting up a factory, and plugging it in, right? There's a science and an art to it. How do you actually mill the flour? How do you do the extraction? These are expertise that already exist in the market. We need to understand when we change the composition of the input seed, of the input grain and raw material, how that impacts, or positively or negatively, right? Hopefully positively, how that creates value for the players. But it doesn't mean NuCicer has to own those steps. We will be more successful when everyone gets a piece of the pie and we're up leveling the entire supply chain.
So let's say you get successful, you start growing, and ConAgra goes, this looks interesting. How do you sort of protect your turf?
Yeah, so our secret sauce is in the breeding and then in the genetics. So it's not, and this is why actually, for the most part, I wouldn't say we view many companies as competitors. We actually view them as potential strategic partners, maybe customers, licensees, where we, if ConAgra or, other big commodity trading companies or ingredient companies wants to upgrade their chickpea ingredient portfolio, we want to work with them to either supply them with a high protein chickpea or develop. We've got so many other really interesting traits in our breeding pipeline that we're working on, develop other chickpea varieties that solve their challenges and create value. And that allows NuCicer to play the technology enabling role. We're doing ingredients today to show and demonstrate that demand, right? We talked about supply and demand, demonstrate that demand. But as we get that traction, what we're doing is doing that through partnerships and starting to take a step back to focus on the very tip of that value chain and how to just create massive ripple effects downstream. So we want to work with them. And it would take tens of millions of dollars and many, many years to recreate, if it's even possible, the genetic library that we've developed. So that's really our differentiation.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
So one thing I still don't totally understand, if I'm a farmer and I want to grow this strain of chickpeas, who do I buy the seeds from?
NuCicer.
Got it.
NuCicer. So we sell the seeds to the grower, and we either buy them back directly, or we work with other ingredient companies through licenses that can buy those seeds from the grower, and we make those connections.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. That's what I thought, but I'm not sure I understood that clearly yet. So I'm gonna switch gears a little bit and sort of talk about starting the company formation, and sort of that end of the spectrum. So talk a little bit about when you guys started, what the big challenges were. Let's start there.
Yeah. So we really got started at the beginning of 2020. And that was, frankly, a very interesting time to be founding a company because we didn't, the idea was really formulating in mid 2019. And we were trying to understand, should we, shouldn't we, should I leave my job, safe space, love the people I'm working with to go on this crazy journey. And that decision wasn't really made until the end of 2019. So we founded the company, early 2020. It's three of us, actually. Like my two co-founders, one of whom is my dad, and happy to get into that if we want to, but my two co-founders, both from UC Davis. And it really started off with this vision, right? Of, we're going to initially just make a high protein chickpea, right? We're going to solve the pain point in the purified protein market, which is chickpea protein tastes better than pea and soy. It is more functional from, the gelling, emulsification type properties than pea and soy, but it's too expensive. So if we increase protein content of the starting seed, we can bring down the cost of production. It was really, initially, it seemed very simple. And that's kind of the original core thesis of the company. And, I think one of the challenges we immediately ran into was we're not a software company. So I can't just open a computer in my garage and produce a product. We need a wet lab. We need field space. We need, we need resources. And so the first and foremost was applying for grants, right? We were too early on to really go out for any type of venture funding. So we working with the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, FAR, we received $1 million grant to really get us going and to demonstrate that the preliminary data that we spun out of UC Davis was scalable, was stable, and create a proof of concept on the protein side. And that got us going. It was not an easy journey, and we immediately, just being in the Davis ecosystem here, identified some startup resources, shared lab space, started talking with growers and other companies that had half an acre that they were going to leave fallow, right? So trying to build those relationships and figure out, how can we, without imposing too much, but finding like-minded people, kind of get things started in a very scrappy early stage, so that we can make it to the next milestones.
Very nice. And so talk a little bit about, if you will, the capitalization of the company. You got this grant, which is wonderful. That's, I always label that as free money for the most part. And have you guys raised institutional money or venture capital?
Yes. So after the grant, we raised, so far we've raised a seed round, and it was led by Lever VC, an alternative protein VC, and then also the Leaps by Bayer, their corporate VC arm. And in total, we've raised $11.7 million in venture funding, which has gone a long way we've actually commercialized something, right? We're no longer pre-revenue from that perspective. We've got a product, it's on the market, we've grown on over 1,000 acres, and that's been a very fast, 4-year journey to get there. And, I think it's been, a lot of it has, in that venture funding and how we've focused on using that money has really been, how do we create the most value immediately, right? Like, what's the highest priority? What's the pain point that we're solving? And I'd say that's maybe the number one lesson and takeaway that I've learned, especially really, really early stage when you're founding a company, is you don't need money to go talk to people and to understand what their challenges are. Why should you be going after protein? You be going after another trait? Is chickpea even worth it, right? I mean, you just need conversations to really validate the process and where you're targeting. If you wait and have those conversations, 2 years into development, you may or may not have gone down the right path.
Right.
So I think that's just a really important aspect.
Yes. I think that, in my days as a venture capitalist, one of the biggest challenges that I saw was companies not talking to potential customers soon enough.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a scary proposition, because you may go talk to them and they say, no, I'm not interested. And all of a sudden you're like deflated, going, oh my God, what am I doing? So it's a very scary proposition. It's much easier to sit in the office and work on the next generation of the product, et cetera, right? Do what you know how to do really well, and you keep doing it over and over again. But if the market doesn't meet it, and getting the product characteristics finely tuned so it really meshes with the market is really challenging. And you only need to be off by 5%, and you're not a successful business.
You have no product. Yep.
Yeah.
Completely. Yeah. So, it's, being even at this stage of the company, and frankly, I think even for taking a step back, companies are, ignoring nonprofits for a moment. Companies being for profit, it is all about sales. Okay, it's about revenue. How much it costs to produce something, where you're spending your operational expenses, and if you have to ask a lot of questions and talk to a lot of people to get to a yes sometimes, right?
That's right.
And it's uncomfortable. It is. I mean, I can say that coming from my background's in tech, not as much in business. And I get uncomfortable just like the next person, right? You get rejected so many times, but every rejection, every no is a learning point, right? And it's, well, why did it not work? And I think if you go in with that lens, especially early on when you have less to lose and you haven't done as much, right?
Right.
And it's not as much about rejection, it's about understanding. And I think that's, literally before we even signed the incorporation paperwork, we'd been talking to a flour mill, we'd, talking to friends in the food industry. What are you using? Why aren't you using chickpea? Would you use chickpea? What would it require for you to get there? Gave me confidence to take the leap. And I think, every week I look at my calendar and say, well, how many conversations have I had with customers, with stakeholders in the supply chain? That's the learning. We can't stop. We're, still at the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. Yeah. Talking about that sales process reminded me, I started my first company in 1980, the venture-backed business, and we talked to one VC and we raised $3 million. Made one pitch. That was it. And raised $3 million. And $3 million in 1980 was a wheelbarrow full of money.
Yes.
And I go, wow, this is pretty easy. And then in the last company I started, we talked to 49 VCs, and on the 50th one gave us a yes. So we got, back to your point, 49 rejections.
Yeah.
And you're at, that's hard, right? It's tough on the ego, but at the same time, like you were saying, every one of those rejections, we learned something, right? Because whenever someone said no, and whether this is a customer or you're trying to raise capital, try to understand why. Where's the mismatch in what you're selling and what they're looking to buy? Because if they say no, there's a mismatch someplace, and it's important to really understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's complex. Decision making is complicated, right? You have to take it, it's not personal. It is, everyone has to, whether, again, like you said, whether it's an investor, whether it's another company, whether it's at any point in the value chain, a grower, a processor, CPG brand, a consumer, they have to meet their ends meet. And there has to be value for both parties. And I think that's, and it's not always just about the economics. Sometimes it's about timing. Sometimes it's about their, strategic decisions and where they're focusing their fund or their company in that moment. So where it could have been, gosh, 2 years ago it would have been a yes, or 2 years from now it would be a yes, but it's not the right timing.
Yeah.
Also plays a factor in it.
A slight addition to that is one of the things, I was in the VC business for a number of years, and the partners would sit around, once a week, and we'd sort of review the deals that we saw and what are we potentially going to invest in. And one of my criteria was, after you go through the pitch and, all the economics and the return and all of that analysis stuff, I used to ask myself the question, do I want to work with that CEO or that founder for the next 4 to 5 years? Yeah. And if the answer to that question is no, that I don't want to work with them, I'm not going to invest. I don't care how good it is.
Yeah.
And that's true with customers too, because when you're selling product to a customer, you have a relationship there, right? There's some person on the other end you're talking to. And so this notion of having a match, not just at sort of the product and specification level and the price, you also sort of need to have a match. At least I think you need to have a match at sort of that, I enjoy working with you and doing this. It's helping both of us, right?
Yeah,
so,
cool. I couldn't agree more. I don't think we talk about that enough actually in business. And it's for a moment tangentially just touching on that. At the end of the day, we are all people. We are all on this planet only for a certain number of years. There are so many hours in the day, and there's a limit on balancing profit and the rational pieces of decision making with I don't know if you want to call it like being content, being happy, being fulfillment, right? In life. And everyone, different points in your life, you have different needs, different passion points, people around you, situations. But I think that does come into play a lot when people are making really critical decisions. And I'm a big fan in our culture, as we've been building out the team here, of making sure that we focus on our work and our the value we're creating, but also the fact that we're all people. We all have our own needs and our own cycles, right? And only when you address that can I think you really make a long-term successful business or customer, supplier, partnership, or investor relationship.
Yeah. Very well said, Kathryn.
Yeah.
So we've been chatting here for 45 minutes. We could go on forever.
Yes.
Is there anything I haven't asked you that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I guess, well, the only thing maybe I would say is, uh, again, maybe a little bit more on the personal side, of things. When I decided to found NuCicer, I really didn't know where it was going to go, and I see great potential, but you also don't know where things are going to go long term, right? And the journey, I think, is really what I try to focus on day to day. Talking with other entrepreneurs, I think that that's just a really important piece for us to remember, and also remember that there's a network here, even for companies that are working on similar technologies, to to benefit from each other, right? And so maybe that's the one piece I'll just leave this with, is I think we need to, especially in this current fundraising environment, in the current economic environment, figure out how to come together across the industry, across different entrepreneurs, to move the needle and have impact. And that's personally what I'm really excited about in a lot of my conversations these days.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a great way to sort of end this podcast as well. And in that, you're much better off collaborating and cooperating with the people within your industry and looking at it that way than you are thinking that every one of them is a competitor.
Yeah. I just can't sleep at night that way either. It's just stressful. And a small slice of a very, very large pie can be more valuable than a large slice of a very small pie.
Right. Absolutely. Hey, Kathryn, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to spend some time chatting with me about your business.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Bela. I really appreciate it.
Bela, that was mind-blowingly interesting. I learned a ton. What were your main takeaways from this?
Well, Mike, I think there's a lot of them. One of them is, in a business like this, you have a lot of customers. So she's got farmers. She's got mills that turn the crops that the farmers produce into something that food producers can then incorporate into their products. The food producers have to convince the grocers to buy the product, the end product. And then we as consumers need to buy the end product. And all of those pieces have to work in order to make a business like this work. And they're fundamentally in the business of seeds and designing, I'll use that word, designing seeds of various different strains that result in certain types of characteristics for the plants that grow. The challenging part of this is you have all of these customers, you have all of these steps. It can take a long time to get from a seed to consumers pulling products off the shelves and consuming them. That can be a long cycle. That's the challenging part. The good part is, once you do that, it's hard to get displaced, because food producers are very reluctant to change ingredients, because it's a big risk for them, right? So that's a barrier to entry if you're trying to get in, but it's also a barrier to entries if you're the one that's established inside there. So to me, I think that's finding the right balance there and having the stamina to go and do this long enough so that you can get the products to be used by the producers and the grocers to buy the product, et cetera. It's a very complicated supply chain here, and all of those parts have to work, and all of those parts take a while to sort of get established and up and running. What did you think, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I like what you said, kind of long runway, but huge lock-in and huge potential. But I think this type of market where there's true value for all of these different stakeholders, and really like feeding the world is a pretty big deal. And this is a market that's global and huge, right? And the need is not going to go away for this. So I thought that the market that she chose was really fascinating. I thought the process that she went through was amazingly interesting. And again, kind of playing off what you said, this idea of learning from lots and lots of discussions with potential customers, and this idea of being told no so many times, right? But learning from each no, I think, is really important. So I think this is fascinating, both from the business of this legume, right, that could really have a big impact on the food supply, and her entrepreneurial journey. The combination was super interesting. And it kind of reminds me, it's really hard for me to motivate my students sometimes when I'm teaching entrepreneurship and innovation to actually go and get out of their dorm rooms and out of their apartments and go and have conversations with actual humans, right? They like to dream up ideas, but they're always a little reticent or a little hesitant to go and actually have face-to-face people. Maybe they'll, oh, can I send them a WhatsApp? It's like, well, yeah, you can. But if you really go out and have a conversation and listen actively and ask follow-up questions, you'll really get a lot more out of it. And once I get them going, they really see the value in asking and listening and learning from information they find out. So I might make this actual episode with Kathryn, required listening for some students, because I think she really made the point eloquently about how important it is to get out there. And it's okay if people tell you no, as long as you learn something from it. But let's talk about the kind of the food tech space a little bit, Bela, and looking out at over the next several years, kind of putting on your VC hat for a minute. How important do you think are these types of businesses, this alternative proteins and this remaking the food chain for the year 2150 or whatever we want to, or 2050, whatever we want to call it, but this idea of making the food chain more healthy and more resilient? Do you think there's a lot of runway here, and this is something we're going to see more of?
Yeah, I think we have to see more of it, because the population of the world is growing, and we need to figure out how to feed people in an efficient and effective way that complements the environment and the earth, not sort of subtracts too much from it. Because so there's this balancing act going on. Food producers have gotten very, very efficient, but at the same time, they've done things that maybe are not the best for the planet as a whole. So where we strike that balance, I think, is a challenge. And finding alternative crops that can be grown, I think, is a huge, huge opportunity. And I think, this is an example of it. And I'm sure there's others out there. And the real challenge, I think, is one of how do we get the customers to pull these things off the shelf, as I like to say. That's because if the customers don't pull it off the shelf, it isn't going to work.
Yep.
So we got to figure that out. And, that's complicated for the food producers, because they'll all tell you that tastes in one part of the country are different than tastes in another part of the country. And clearly from one culture to another culture, tastes are different. So something that works in one place may not necessarily work in a different place. And that different place can be as little as 100 miles away. It doesn't need to be halfway around the world. So sorting through all those types of things, I think, is a real challenge. But I think this sort of ag tech business sector, I think, is a huge opportunity, and it's a very important opportunity in order to protect the planet and to give people nutritious food that will be not detrimental to their health.
Yeah, agreed, Bela. Well said. And, thinking about it from, if you're excited about this like I am, what can you do? And sure, you can invest in companies like this, or you can go work for companies like this. But in the bigger sense, from a consumer standpoint, one of the things that I've talked about with my students is, and sometimes these products, if you have to go to the section of health foods, or you have to go to the Whole Foods market or something like this. But sometimes in your regular grocery store, they have a section of these kind of products that have from startups, or sometimes they're big companies that are using startup-y names, but seek these products out. And if you have a few extra dollars, because they can be a little more expensive than the traditional products, but go and try some of these things. And I like to, when I see 2 or 3 new products in a category of alternative proteins, I like to bring them home and do a little taste test, and see what they're all about. And definitely, I've incorporated some of these products. I'm not a strict vegan or anything like this, but I am trying to eat more alternative plant-based foods. And And I've incorporated a lot of these into my diet. Some I try and I don't like, but some I do, and they're part of my habits now. And I think that's what you can do as a consumer is don't be afraid to try some. Yes, I understand they can be a little risk. And if you're somebody, I have plenty of people that are in my family and my friends that they don't have a lot of extra money for food. I get it, right? Feed your family first. But if you have a little extra money, experiment and try some of these and support these companies that are good. And maybe it'll, change your habits a little bit, recommend some things to some friends. When I have friends over a lot of times for dinner, we'll try some of these and surprise them and kind of let them decide if they like it or not. And I think those are some ways that you can support startups in this space of eating healthier and better for the planet by just trying them and seeing what you like, And if you like products too, make sure that when you go to the grocery store and you see the manager of the cold section, right, let them know how much you like it, And I think that that those managers, they are interested in that kind of feedback from customers because they're the ones sometimes that make the decisions on which of these products to carry at a local level. Because like you said, Bela, tastes are different. And I know at least the way the grocery industry used to work when I was in the US, if you talk to your manager of your refrigerated case, and she or he may have some impact on these choices. And this is again how you drive the pull from customers, right? At the very granular ground level. So I think that's kind of just adding a little bit to that point about trying to get consumers to try these things. Try it, no guts, no glory. And if you hate it, I'm sorry, I apologize. Right? You can blame me at the dinner table. All right. But that's my shtick on this, Bela. So I don't know. What do you think? Should we wrap this up?
Yeah, Mike, I think we should call it a day.
All right, listeners, thanks for yet another interesting entrepreneurial. No, wait, I said that wrong. Bela, thank you for yet another interesting entrepreneurial interview. And thanks to our guests, Kathryn, and everything in the wonderful world of chickpeas and garbanzo beans and legumes and anything you want to call that. But what a cool, informative interview, and hope the startup continues to grow. Listeners, thank you for joining us today, and hope you found this episode interesting and thought-provoking like we did. And as always, if you have questions about what we've discussed, please feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is bela.and.mike@gmail.com.
And please do follow the podcast. Hit that follow button on your podcasting app. Write us a review. Tell your friends about the podcast if you enjoy it. So until next time, signing off from upstate New York. See you all soon.
Sounds great, Bela. From over here in Münster, Germany, I'm going to make some chickpeas for dinner. And the German word, just in case anybody's interested, is Kichererbsen. Okay, for chickpeas in German. But everybody, thanks again. And from Münster, Germany, we'll see you next time.